Hello everyone, my name is Coralie Siegel. I am a committee member of the Future of Meetings. First, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we are meeting on today and pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Today I am delighted to introduce to our closing keynote speaker, Professor Yvonne Rogers. Yvonne is a professor of interaction design, the director of University College Interaction Center, and a deputy head of the computer science department at UCL. Yvonne's research interests are in the area of interaction design, human-computer interaction, and ubiquitous computing. The central theme of her work is concerned with designing interactive technologies that augment humans. The current focus of her research is on human data interaction and human-centered artificial intelligence. Yvonne is a fellow of the Association for Computing Machinery, ACM, British Computer Society, BCS, and the ACM Computer Human Interaction, Shy Academy. Yvonne will talk to us about meetings through technology, efficient or empowering. Over to you, Yvonne.
Hello there. Greetings from down under, where it's rather wet and cold. I hope and suspect it's a bit warmer where you are. Today I'm going to be talking about how technology has been used to facilitate meetings and to support them. In particular, to what extent are they making them more efficient or more empowering? And you can see on my first slide there are 3 images of different types of technology that have been developed. On the left is one of the first video phones that was developed by BT about 60 years ago. In the middle is what's called the video wall, and this was developed by Bell Labs back in the 80s to allow people in different buildings to socialize during coffee break. And it has a very large display on either side of the walls to make it appear as if they are actually in the same room. And then on the right is a current technology that's been developed using augmented reality and smartphones, which allows you to appear as a hologram in someone else's space. So how effective are these? To begin, you're all familiar now with months spent in lockdown with starting the day with a cup of coffee and having meetings in Teams or in Zoom. Somehow we get used to this. And then after a while, we started to have more people joining us in meetings, and I call these Mosaic meetings, where people try to compete with who's got the most exotic background, and that was fun for a while. But by the end of the day, many of us suffer from what's called Zoom fatigue, because we're having to pay attention differently to what's going on in the meeting and what's on the display, which is quite different from being face to face. So in summary, we've seen how COVID-19 has shown how we can be more efficient and more productive when meetings remotely through these Zoom and the like. But one of the problems is that much social interaction has been lost, and you can read lots of blogs about people's experiences of this. But in going along this line, we find that there's less creativity that happens during these meetings. And in particular, there's less time to generate new ideas. It seems somehow not the right place to be bouncing ideas off each other. And there's less social cohesion or a sense of collective identity, especially if it's a large meeting of more than a few people, 100 meeting. There's less banter, laughter, humour, jokes, gossip, side channel catch up, although some people have been using the chat window, and that's proved to be a poor cousin or a substitute to allow these things. But there's no body language really, so to speak, or physical contact. You may be able to wink or smile, but somehow it doesn't match up. So we've lost a lot through these remote meetings. So how can we think about using technology to enable us to feel closer when we are physically apart? And as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, there has been a number of attempts over the years to design technology to try and achieve this. It's also interesting to see what new technology is around the corner as to whether that could improve upon existing efforts. But importantly, when we're thinking about designing new technologies to support meetings more effectively, is to think what design principles are being adopted, what is out there to help. And I'm going to discuss three design principles that come from human-computer interaction. That's the field that I do research in. And these are social translucence, presence, and telepresence. So firstly, what's meant by social translucence? This refers to trying to give people information or awareness about others who are in a meeting through using various kinds of ambient displays. And this, importantly, is using spatial awareness. And by doing this, it can make remote people more visible. So an early example was Babble, that should have an E on the end there, that was developed by IBM. And if you look on the right, it does look a bit dated, but the bit I want to draw your attention to is the circle called the social proximity in the middle. And this shows by these coloured marbles, who is speaking the most and who is speaking the least and who's outside the meeting. So those in the circle are talking via text. And the pink and the blue blobs are the ones who are doing the most talking, whereas the light blue and yellow are doing least. And you can see at a glance just who's involved. That's providing you know who the coloured blobs mean. But this was one of the earliest, and it proved very powerful visualization that people were drawn to just find out what was going on. More recently, there have been a number of other types of applications that have been developed to support this social awareness through using spatial translucence. And one that's used in organizations is called Sococa. And you can see from here that it uses a 2D metaphor of a spatial office where there are tables and chairs and water coolers, and you are represented as a blob, as an avatar, and you can move yourself with your cursor to the different places in the office, so you can go and sit next to someone and click on them and see if they want to have a chat. So you can see at a glance who's in the office, who's busy and where they are, who's in a meeting and so on. So it provides this awareness of what others are doing, which throughout the day, which is often lost in the meeting type software that we're currently using like Zoom and Teams. Another attempt at trying to provide this social translucence or this ambience is called high fidelity. I don't know if any of you have tried this, but what it tries to do is to use audio to give you that sense of who's around, a sense of background noise. So I'll just play it. Hopefully you can hear this. I'm the AB bubble. I'm just looking at what's going on there. So as you can see that rather than having tiles, this is sort of a circle of bubbles that gives quite a different spatial metaphor. But also you get, as you move around, you can hear different conversations and you can listen in on what people are saying. So it gives an audio background which can be quite effective. Oh, we don't want to hear that again. The second design principle that I want to refer to is called presence. And this is where you try and design the software or the technology to enable you to feel as if you are there in this space with the other people. And this has been used a lot in creating virtual reality worlds, mainly for gaming, but more recently they've been designed to support social interactions and meetings. And this one is Facebook Spaces, and you don a VR headset, but also you use your controllers to move your arms and fingers, and so you can gesture and point. And so this gives you more of an embodied sense of interacting with others. So here you can see three people all very happy. One's about to give a good birthday present and the other two are pointing at something. So it's a more richer experience. Mozilla Hubs is another one that came out a few months ago. And this again is a social VR where you can add things, you can create your own worlds, and these are avatars. We used this once for a social after one of our seminars at UCLIC, and it was a bit sort of surreal, a bit weird, and I think you have to be a bit into gaming to really get the best of this. But I think some people really enjoy interacting in this environment. The third design principle is telepresence, and in some ways it overlaps with presence, but the difference here is where it's you are transported into a physical space and move around using one of these self-propelled robots, and you do this using your own keyboard, so you can shift or move the arrows up and down to actually move this device. This robot which has wheels. So you can see here in the middle, when we had that great President Obama, he's talking to someone with this. And this one is called the Beam Plus. And on the right, you can see how it's moving through an office. On the left, this is my PhD student who couldn't get to a conference in the US. And she was giving a demo, and we dressed her up to make her feel a bit more human. So the benefits of these is that you can move around rather than being just tethered to a laptop, and that gives you more of a sense of being there. Unfortunately, for the time being, you can only be on one floor. So if you get to the lifts, you have to ask someone if they wouldn't mind pressing the button to get up to the next floor. As I said, you can customize it to dress up, and it also gives a greater sense of presence and embodiment than having one view within a room. It also enables hybrid meetings. So, for example, you could be sitting with other people who are physically in the room, and so long as you're not the only one, you can maybe have 2 or 3 of these beam robots. It can go some way towards bridging social distance spaces, so long as they're at the same height and they can get to feel as if they are part of that meeting. Except when these people in the physical room go off to get some more coffee, you're kind of left there, although you can follow them. They've even been used to help students graduate who can't be there because of COVID. So here you can see they've been dressed up, a bit like my student was, and they're holding their certificate and they're going up, or rather they're receiving it from the provost there. So that's quite a creative use for allowing students to receive their awards. Another, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, another way by which you can improve presence and telepresence is through the use of holograms. This is a company called HoloMe who we're working with, and what it currently does is it allows a human hologram, like the ones you can see here, to be seen through your smartphone using an augmented reality app. And so you just open up the app and scan the room, so it creates a 3D model, and then the person will appear as if they're standing on your floor and they'll talk to you. And this can be quite effective and powerful at making them feel as if they're actually there. So currently they're pre-recorded one-way videos done with a green screen. But what we're currently doing with this company is working out how to make this two-way live communication, where the participants would wear some augmented reality glasses, like the Nreal ones that are just coming out. So they'd be lightweight, not the sort of heavy ones that are around. And so that will be really exciting to think about how having holograms of people appearing in your meetings and interacting with them in that way, does that increase the presence? And that's something we're looking forward to discovering. So what I'm really interested in when we return to physical meetings, this is one of the last meetings I was at in Slovenia, in Ljubljana, where we were having one of our European research meetings discussing the future of AI. And one of the things that I'm currently working on is how can we design technology to augment how people work in meetings, in particular how to empower them. And we're doing this by thinking about combining artificial intelligence and new user interfaces to create intelligent tools. So you might be aware that Alexa, who was developed for domestic use to begin with and was hugely successful, many people have an Alexa at home. In the last year or two, it's been used and developed for business meetings. So Alexa can act as an assistant, can take minutes and can schedule meetings and essentially improve your productivity at meetings. But it's quite limited. There you can see an Alexa sitting there by the apples as to what it can do. It can certainly do some of that rather tedious stuff like taking minutes and writing them up, because it's got good speech recognition. But what else might it do if we put more artificial intelligence into this device? And that's what we're looking at, is what else could we get these virtual agents to do to improve and empower people in meetings. So the project that we've been working on for the last year or two is called the VoiceViz project, and this is with Leon Reichertz and Ethan Wood and my colleague Licia Capra. And what we've been doing is designing an agent, a collaborative agent called Fizzy, that will be is intended for meetings rather than a one-on-one. And the idea is that Fizzy can help groups to do sense making when they're in meetings, in open-ended tasks, and in particular to encourage the various group members to take part in more discussion, be able to brainstorm and engage in divergent thinking, all the things that we're lost in these remote meetings. And that it would be doing this not for meetings where you're trying to get things done quickly, but for more open-ended tasks where you've got lots of data, for example, and you're trying to analyze it and see patterns and work out what's behind the data and what possible trends there are. So our study looked firstly at an agent which actually was a Wizard of Oz. It was a human pretending to be an agent because for this stage of the research it made more sense to be able to control and manipulate the conditions. So the agent could either speak during the meetings or it would appear as a chat box and make suggestions. And we were interested in whether having the different interface would facilitate conversations differently in meetings. So here was the setting. You can see there's a group here who are looking at a large display of data. These are visualizations of health data. And what they're trying to do is to discuss why there are differences. And this is actually obesity data, and it's for over the last 30 years for women and girls, for men and boys, children and adults, and developing and developed countries. And so Fizzy has generated a number of visualizations, and it will present those, and the group can ask for different ones. But Fizzy will also prompt them when it appears that they're stuck, and will ask them questions to get them to think about why is there a trend here, or there's a big difference there. So, to summarise, Fizzy's role was designed to act as a facilitator in group meetings and respond to requests from members in that group to present those various data visualizations, but also to prompt team members to try out different lines of thinking, particularly when they're stuck, when Fizzy thinks it's an opportune moment to do so. And we had a simple rule to decide that, which was when there was 3 seconds of silence, when no one was saying anything, Fizzy might say things like, do you need a hint for analysing X? That's the voice condition. And in the text condition, it would just pop up on the screen as text. Or what do you think of this? So they're quite open-ended to trigger more discussion. Shall we move on? Did you consider the difference between variable X and Y? And what might have caused the sudden spike in this data? So in the voice condition, just to compare the two, you can see here there's a speaker that will speak the questions, and a microphone which they can ask questions from, and the graphs will appear in front of them. The various commands that they can use to ask Fizzy are written on pieces of paper in front of them, so they know what Fizzy will understand. So they were told that Fizzy was quite limited in what it could, because she's a she in this case, say and do. So they could, for example, say the voice command to generate the visualization, show women and men. Whereas Fizzy might say, why is there a difference between women and men? And in the touch condition, again, the same setup with some cards showing what commands. But what you see here is rather than the microphone and the speaker, there's a tablet which they can touch to select the various commands from, and which the Fizzy's questions will appear on. So here, as I said, our simple rule was that Fizzy would ask a question when a meeting goes silent for a while. So you can just see in this setup, nothing's been said. And then
if I would say one of them is slowing down in recent years, which one would you say it is?
Then Fizzy just in the voice condition. And what happened straight after that was that they started talking again. They were directed to look at something in the visualization, and that triggered further discussion. So What did we find? Well, overall, we found statistical differences, but overall, Fizzy's questions acted as prompts that was able to scaffold the participants' conversations both in the text and in the voice condition. And so they proved to be effective in both. But we did find differences that in the voice condition, the participants spent more time looking at more of the visualizations, and they took more turns and they explored more of the data, and this resulted in more in-depth discussions and identification of trends. And part of this involved bouncing off each other ideas and thinking out aloud. In the touch condition, where they had to look at the display and read it aloud, what we found was that the discussion was less rapid than in the voice and less spontaneous. And in fact, what it did was it slowed down their conversation because they had to read Fizzy's question and then they had to check that the other participants in their group had read the question. And sometimes one volunteered to read them. But this led to a different way of thinking. In a way, it slowed it down. And that's not to say that it's not a good thing, but it resulted in a different kind of conversation. So, just to summarize, I think the added value of having this type of intelligent agent take part in a meeting is, as we saw with Alexa, it can improve efficiency and productivity. But in our study, we've shown how it can improve sense making and even creativity in the way in which you solve a problem. And in particular, having them prompt like that can scaffold group working in terms of the problem solving. And when you use voice, it can help encourage more fluid and fast-paced discussions. When it's appearing on a screen, that can slow down the interactions and get them to think in a different way. So it depends on the nature of the meeting as to whether you want a fast-paced type discussion or something that's a bit slower. And the way in which Fizzy worked was quite, as I said, quite limited. The users knew that she wasn't going to have a conversation, that she would just prompt now and again. And as a result, they didn't get frustrated or disappointed when Fizzy didn't answer their challenging questions. Some of the participants afterwards said that once, if they were more experienced, they might like Fizzy to make suggestions about what the data means. But they appreciated that it was getting them to do the thinking rather than doing the thinking on their behalf. Another important finding was that using this type of virtual assistant can be very democratizing in that anyone in that group can ask the virtual agent a question, not just a baton holder. And what I mean by the baton holder is if you have one laptop, that person who's in front of that is very much in control of doing the asking. So it doesn't designate someone to be the person who interacts with the system. So to summarize, I hope in my talk I've shown you many ways in which technology has been designed during the last 70 years to enable people to connect with each other in these remote meetings. And it started off with video conferencing, and what we're now exploring is how we can use holograms. Admittedly, there's still videos of people so that they have the whole body appearing. We've got used to head and shoulders, but we think that having whole body interactions can improve the sense of presence. One of the benefits, I mean, I'm sure you know many of having these remote meetings is that more people attend them. They don't have so many excuses as to why they can't attend, but also potentially there are thousands of people who can participate in them at the time. And so there are benefits. They can be more productive, and they are a godsend during lockdown, but they do cause us to get fatigued, and we miss out on many things. I also talked about some of the design principles that we should use when we're designing new technologies, and these included social translucence or ambience and spatial awareness, presence and telepresence. So in each of these, you're trying to give a bit more to the person to make them feel as if they are there. So you're giving them richer cues or ways in which to interact with each other. But I think there's still a long way to go before we have developed technologies that allow us to feel truly there. My own personal view is that the future is very much in physical meetings, although hybrid meetings may be the halfway house. And what I've hopefully shown you is that we can combine artificial intelligence and future UX or interfaces to scaffold meetings in new ways that will empower people. And what I showed you was how to think about virtual assistants like Alexa, not to just do the grunt work, but how they can get you to think differently, to solve problems, to be guided and scaffolded in different ways. And so I hope that's given you some food for thought, and I very much look forward to your questions. So thanks very much, and good day.